So there's this YouTuber. Well, I'll get into that in a little bit. Obviously, this is an off-grid vlog, so we need to talk about off-griddy things. So it's snowing a little bit today. Now, I know somebody's going to say, that's not off-grid, you got power lines. I mean, every time they see the power line, somebody's got to say something. Okay, we're not connected. So it's snowing a little bit today. This has been a extremely warm year. I'm enjoying the snow, but we're not going to get much. But it sure has been nice that we haven't had to use a lot of firewood. So I've got a fella that wanted me to talk more about the well. Since it's one of my favorite subjects, I thought, what the heck, let's talk about the well. I kind of cleaned this area up. We used to have, well, until today, we had a large blue bin in here that had rice and flour in it. Well, we don't eat rice and flour anymore. We're carnivores. So Carolyn has been cooking up the rice for the chickens. Not sure what we're going to do with the flour, but I got it out of here, and John will be happy to know that I finally got the generator up here. I'm trying to isolate individual storage areas or houses or campers in case there's a fire. The shed has all of our electronic system in it. If it goes up, we won't have any electric. Well, this was sitting underneath the shed. The shed went up, generator goes up, and then we have no electric. We have nothing except for the little 1500 watt generator that can't run the well. So we'd be out of water. So my goal is to kind of get everything spread out. The house catches on fire, all our backup equipment is in the shed, all our electric equipment. That way we can just hook up the shed to the RV, live in the RV while we build the tiny house again. So everything's kind of isolated. If one thing goes, we still have some backup systems in play. So we got this in here. John will be happy. John has harped on me for ever since I said I was going to move it up here, but I had to get that food out of there. So this is the well. It used to be just a little hole in the ground down here, 6 inches underneath this concrete. I put this concrete here. So it had a metal pipe that went down it. So there's a hole with a metal pipe that went down, a 6-inch pipe, and that's called a well casing. So the casing goes down. Nowadays, the casing goes all the way down to bedrock. But this only went down, I don't know, 30 feet or so. The water level is 70 feet down. So what I noticed was there is a break in the well casing. A root has grown into it or something. Well casings only last about 40 years. And then you're supposed to pull them up, so you have to have a well guy come out and pull it out and put a new one in. Well, I don't want to spend that kind of cost. So there's a second thing you can do. This is a 4-inch pipe. So the well casing is 6 inches. This is 4 inches. So what you do is you get a well packer. A well packer is nothing but a piece of PVC, probably 2 feet long, that has rubber rings attached to it. So you got, I think, 4 rubber rings that go around it. And those 4 rubber rings seal up against that metal casing. That leaky well casing is now dripping down onto that well packer. And the whole thing is probably filled up with water by now. That well packer is just holding all that dirt and dirty water from falling down into the bedrock water. A lot of people, and I used to think the same thing, so I shouldn't say a lot of people. Most people think that water seeps in from the topsoil and goes down through the bedrock and into that layer of water. And that's not necessarily true. I've seen a video. It was an empty, drained, long expired well, however you want to look at it. Somebody dropped a camera down it. And basically what it is an underground river. Now, the one that I saw in the video was literally a cavern. It was pretty neat to see. This one is a river surrounded by bedrock. So you got the bedrock and it's just super moist. So the recovery rate of this is about 5 gallons a minute because that water's got to seep in through all that bedrock. Well, the well pump itself is 15 gallons a minute. So if the recovery rate is 5 gallons a minute, this well will easily remove all the water out of it very quickly. Now, like I said, the water level is about 70 feet down. The depth of the well, I think, is 130 feet. Don't quote me, it might be 100 feet, I don't remember. But regardless, there's only 30 to 60 feet of water, 6-inch diameter. Now, there is calculations. You can figure out how much water is in that hole, that 6-inch hole. Just go on Google. You can figure it out pretty easy. So inside this pipe, you'll see that we have this hose, this black pipe here that goes all the way down to the well pump. The well pump just dangles there. So we have a rope tied to it. We have the wire, and so it's just hanging out there. Now, you don't put that well pump all the way down to the bottom where the dirt is. You have to keep it above, I think, 10 feet. So it's 10 feet above the water or the bottom. So that means I only have maybe 50 feet of water above it. So you got to keep that in mind. So this is what the well pump looks like. So down here is the motor. This is the motor, and up here is the pump. So the motor spins the pump. So now you have another 1.5 to 2 feet that you have to take into consideration, because this is where the water gets sucked in at and goes up this black pipe and out. So now you just keep subtracting water level from your well. So you say you have a 130-foot well, but you don't. You got to make all these subtractions, and it's very important. Now, a normal well, which mine is not, will pump water into a tank, a pressurized tank. And I've seen these pressurized tanks. I used to play with them. It has a bladder in it, a rubber bladder, and you can actually fill it up with air. And so the water fills this tank up. It comes up under pressure. When you open your faucet, the tank is what is supplying your house. That pressure from that bladder pushes water into your house, 30 psi or whatever you got it set at. When that tank starts to empty, that pump will kick on and fill that tank back up. So it's constantly cycling. It is actually very hard on the pump to have to cycle all the time like that. So the way I do it, and it's just easier because of freezing weather and all kinds of stuff, mine I turn on and I leave on for a while. About 20 gallons, maybe 30 gallons sometimes. I run it daily off my solar panels, and I fill the IBC tank. So it only starts up one time a day, fills the tank, and shuts off. Whereas your well, if you have a tank, a pressurized tank, you can go and listen to it. Now, I don't know if somebody's going to make fun of me about that sound effects. Well, that's going to wear out the motor on your pump. And I would imagine that people have to replace their pumps about every 10 years. Now, I got this pump, both of these pumps. This is the original pump, but it was too big. Once I downsized the hole to 4 inches, this one's too big to fit down in there unless I take it all apart. If I take it apart and I put it down there, I may not get it out again. So we're using this as a backup, worst case scenario. And it would be like an SHTF backup. If this ever goes out, I'll just go buy another 3-inch pump, as I think is what's in there. That way I don't have to put this one down there in case anything ever happens to it. I may not get it out again. So the only solution, if it gets stuck down there, is you cut everything. You cut all these components here, let it drop, and now you've wasted all that distance in your well. Now, I got this off Amazon. It's a 110 volt. Most pumps are 220. So a 110 is like a house socket. So maybe you can see here that the generator is a house socket. And I think it's about 600 to 800 watts is the one I got down in here. I get confused because I've got two different ones. This one might be 800, I don't remember. The generator is 2,500 watts. The solar panels is 2,000 watts. So there's plenty of power to power it. Now you got to think about startup. You always have a surge of power on startup for a second or two. So if you're running off an inverter, 1,000 watt inverter, as a matter of fact, is what I use. Well, we run the house off 1,000 watt. Normally, when it's just running, it's an 800 watt pump, you should be able to run it. But you have that surge. And I think this pump is like double. So 800 times 2 is 1,600 watts for a second or two. Well, that 1,000 watt inverter wouldn't run it, so I have to have a 2,000 watt inverter just for that startup. So keep that in mind. Most motors, like your refrigerator, well, any type of motor, is going to have that surge. Now, air conditioners, window air conditioners, don't have that surge. They have a condenser in there. And you can buy these, except they're really expensive and they're not, I don't see the point in them. But it's just, it's stored energy. So when you shut your well off or your motor or whatever, like the air conditioner, energy will store up in it. And that way it will, when you turn it on, that stored energy will go in there and turn on your pump for you or your motor. And then your electric system will take over. A lot of van lifers use that component to run their refrigerator and different things. I didn't see the point. I just as well go ahead and get the 2,000 watt inverter. That way we can run different things on it, like the vacuum cleaner and just all kinds of different stuff. It was the same price basically. Those condensers were pretty expensive, so why not just get the inverter? Now these pumps, like I said, you can, I'm not sure if I said it or not, you can buy these on Amazon. They're called Hallmark, like the Christmas card, Hallmark. They're Hallmark pumps. Now, everybody in the review section of these pumps absolutely rave about them. They're great pumps. I think there was one bad review. It only lasted for a week, and I probably know why it lasted for a week. The only thing that had a huge complaint about it was the rust. They rust. Don't know why. I mean, it's stainless steel. You would think it wouldn't rust, but they do rust. But I'm going to be honest. It's never been noticeable for me. The only time I've noticed the rust, I was having some solar panel problems. So I was testing the solar panels and I was turning the well pump on, shutting it off, on, off, just about as fast as I'm talking, on, off, on, off. I was trying to figure out what was wrong with my solar panels. And I guess the rust was breaking loose with all that jolting around. I don't think you would ever notice it any other time. So these pumps are really nice. Now, one of the things that I noticed in the review section of the Amazon well pump thing was a lot of people bought them for properties that they were growing. They didn't have a house on it. They had a well, but they were growing their gardens. And so people would throw these down into the well, hook up a hose just like I did and run it straight to the garden and let it feed itself. Now, the one that said it failed after a week, my suspicions is what he did was he deadheaded the pump. These pumps have to have water going through them to keep them cool. So you can see here I have a garden hose valve on it. And the reason I do that is I want to regulate the amount of water. Remember, I got to keep my water flow down to 5 gallons a minute, whereas the pump down in here is 15 gallons a minute. So I slow it down so I don't run my well out of water. It'll recover, but if you run the well out of water, now you don't have any water cooling the pump. So you got to be careful with that. Well, if you shut this too much and then there's not enough water going through it, same problem. The cooling of the pump is going to seize it up. You're just not going to have enough cooling. What happens is it starts to heat up and the water inside the pump starts to turn into steam. When it happens, you can tell it's happening because the whole system surges. Dun, dun. That's what's happening is that steam has now been introduced into your plumbing and it's jerking around. When I was using this one, I deadhead this one all the time because I would slow it down, but I was slowing it down too much. This one's 33 gallons a minute and it needed, let's say, 10 gallons a minute. Whereas this one, I don't have that problem at all. I've never had a problem. As a matter of fact, this black pipe here, about, I think 70 feet down, I've put a little hole about the size of my pinky into the pipe. The reason I did that is so the water will always drain back down. So this pipe is empty. It has no water in it down to 70 feet. That way, if it freezes, there's nothing in the pipe to freeze. Well, that also gives me advantages with this 15 gallon per minute pump that I don't think it will deadhead with that water spraying out. There's enough flow through that little hole to keep the water moving enough that it doesn't freeze this little pump up. But it just never worked with that one. That one was just way too big. It was a mistake. They're only like 150, 160 bucks, so it wasn't a catastrophe. Well, then after I put this pipe in, I concreted the floor and I built this shed around it. The reason I had to do all that was water from the ground up here was getting down into the well. The shed, I put these pipes, there were just pipes laying all over this yard when we moved here. So I don't know, that pipe's probably 4 feet long. I just drove that in there. There's a hole in the board here, and that keeps it from the shed from blowing away. But the thing that solved my problem the best was I dug a ditch. My problem was water was coming up from the hill and rushing down to the well. So I dug this ditch, I made a mound of dirt behind it, and water cannot get to the shed now. The reason I entitled this one, the famous YouTuber won't shut his mouth, is because I keep talking about the well, but I really enjoy this conversation. And now I know somebody else does too. So if you'll click this up next box, it'll take you to a video where I was talking about being miserly. It really does save a lot of heartache. So I hope I can inspire you to work on your own systems when you're living your dream. Thanks for watching.